Single mother left to die in snowstorm with her babies. Then a native hunter risked everything. The winter didn't wait. It came in fast, mean, and without mercy. Snow slammed into the walls of Elena's cabin like fists trying to get in, and each gust of wind sounded more like a warning than weather. Her hands, raw from chopping what little wood remained, shook as she bundled the last of the blankets tighter around her newborn twins. Thomas was gone. 3 weeks earlier, the fever had taken him, and with him went their only horse, the last supply run, and every plan they had for surviving this godforsaken winter. She hadn't cried when she buried him. She couldn't afford to. Before we begin, welcome to Cracks of Light, where real heart meets cinematic storytelling. If you believe in strength through adversity, in moments that change lives forever, then you're in the right place. Be sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications. What's coming next may stay with you long after the video ends. There were diapers to change, bodies to warm, and a pantry so empty it echoed. The fire was dying again. She sat with her back to the door, holding both babies close, her body trying to give what the world had stopped providing. She knew she wouldn't make it another 2 nights. Maybe not even one. Not without help. Not in this cold. Not alone. That's when the knock came. At first, she thought it was the wind, maybe a branch, maybe the kind of sound you imagine when your body is fading and your brain starts looking for miracles. But then it came again, firm, deliberate. A fist, not a branch. Someone was out there. She grabbed the rifle. Her heart pounded, not just from fear, but from the sheer absurdity of it. Who would be out in this storm? What kind of man knocked in the middle of a whiteout, when even the wolves stayed hidden? She didn't shout. She didn't ask who it was. She stepped carefully to the door, rifle raised, and paused. The latch was frozen stiff. She worked it loose with one trembling hand, the other still on the trigger. When the door cracked open, the cold hit her like a slap. But the man on the other side didn't move. He just stood there, tall, cloaked in fur, his face wrapped, snow crusted on his shoulders, eyes watching hers like he wasn't sure if he was dreaming too. She kept the gun between them. He didn't flinch. Slowly, he reached into a bundle at his side and pulled out something wrapped in hide. He placed it on the doorstep. Smoked meat. Then another bundle, flint, dried moss, fire starter. Supplies. Still, she didn't lower the gun. He said just one word. Peace. And that was all. She stared at him. Then the rifle lowered. Her hands went to the door, and she opened it wider. No words. Just the silent transaction of desperation and trust. He stepped inside, not like a stranger, but like someone used to silence. She gestured toward the fire. He went to it, began rebuilding it without asking, every move practiced and efficient. The baby stirred. He didn't look back, but he slowed down, softening his movements like he understood that life was sleeping behind him. She watched from the corner, not ready to speak, not ready to trust. But for the first time in weeks, the cabin no longer felt like a tomb. That night, the fire crackled again. 2 infants breathed warm against their mother's chest. And not far from them, a man wrapped in quiet sat cross-legged on the floor, feeding the flames with pieces of dry hope. This was how survival began. Not with a scream, not with a rescue, but with a stranger, a spark, and the decision to let someone in. Under the glow of the rekindled fire, Elena watched him without speaking. The stranger hadn't asked for anything, not food, not shelter, not even her name. He simply sat near the flames, drying his gloves, occasionally glancing toward the bundled twins, as if quietly measuring their breathing. She finally asked who he was. His reply was steady, not loud, not proud. My name is Ian. That was all he offered at first. But later, after the babies had drifted into sleep and the winds outside softened, he told her more. His mother was from a northern tribe, his father a white fur trapper who'd lived with her people until he died of fever when Ian was just a boy. He said it without sentiment. Life in the wild didn't afford many long stories. But in the way he built the fire, moved silently, chose his words with care, Elena recognized someone shaped by both wilderness and wariness. She didn't interrupt. That night, they spoke little more. But in the morning, she watched him gather snow and melt it clean, slice dried elk into manageable strips. show her how to wrap it tight in bark for storage. She noticed how the babies settled when he was near. Maybe it was his steadiness. Maybe they just sensed what she was beginning to feel. He was dangerous only to the storm. Over the next 2 days, he didn't leave. And she didn't ask him to. Her rifle remained propped in the corner, untouched. He wasn't a guest, and he wasn't yet a friend. But when she failed to light the fire after a restless night, he didn't comment. He knelt beside her and showed her again, slower this time, his hands moving with unspoken patience. "You don't strike too fast," he said. "Flame comes when there's breath and time, not just force." She listened, trying again. On the third strike, the spark caught. She smiled. He nodded once, then stood and went to feed the twins. By the end of the third day, the snow stopped. The sky didn't clear, but the silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was invitation. Ian said the worst of the storm had passed, but it wouldn't be the last. This was only the beginning of a season that would kill anyone standing still. "You can't survive here alone," he said simply. "Not with children. Not without a horse. Not this far out." She didn't argue. He didn't say more. That night, he slept closer to the fire. She pulled the cradle board nearer to her own side. In the morning, Ian told her he would take her somewhere safe. His village was hidden, far enough from the roads that no patrols found it, but close enough that it wasn't days without food. There were others there, elders, mothers, healers. People who would help. People who, he promised, would see the babies as gifts, not burdens. Elena didn't answer right away. Her voice was hoarse from days of dryness, her thoughts tangled. But when she looked at James and Nora, the name she'd chosen alone, whispered only once, she knew there wasn't a real choice. She began packing without another word. Ian helped but never took over. That she noticed too. They moved before the next front rolled in. Elena carried one child. Ian carried the other. He broke trail through the drifts, slowed his pace to match her steps, and never once made her feel like a burden. At midday, they stopped by a rock overhang, and he built a small fire using nothing but what he found beneath the ice. He handed her a small cup of melted snow and herbs. "For strength," he said. She drank without question. He unwrapped a tightly sealed pouch of dried berries and meat, breaking it into pieces they could share. She fed the babies first. Always first. When she shivered too long, he took off his outermost layer and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Don't argue," he said when she opened her mouth. "Warmth isn't pride." That night, they slept sitting upright under the rock, back to back, her shoulders pressed against his. There were no words, but in the dark, the silence between them felt like something growing. On the fourth day, they reached the ridge. Ian pointed beyond it without speaking. She climbed with him slowly, legs numb and boots soaked. And then she saw it. A small valley, ringed by forest, steam rising in thin curls from patches of open earth. "Hot springs," he said. "They keep the valley alive through the worst winters." Elena stared, not quite believing. Smoke rose from cone-shaped lodges in the distance. It looked quiet, not empty, just whole. She had forgotten what that felt like. They approached slowly. Ian moved with caution, signaling his presence long before they reached the first fire circle. Children peeked from behind hides. Women stood, watching. A few men stepped forward, eyes narrow but not hostile. Ian spoke in a language Elena didn't understand, but their body language changed. One of the women, older with streaks of white in her braids, stepped toward Elena and placed a hand on the cradle board. She said something soft, melodic, then nodded. Elena didn't know what the words meant, but she knew the meaning. That night, Ian brought her to a smaller lodge near the edge of the circle. Inside, it was warm and prepared, extra furs, room for the children. "They were told to expect you," he said. She didn't ask how. She placed the babies down, looked back at him. "And you?" she asked. "I'll sleep near my cousin's fire," he said. "They'll want to see how you care for your own first." He paused. "It matters here." Elena nodded. Before he left, he looked at her a little longer than before. "You made it further than most." And then he stepped out. That night, she slept without waking once. No wolves, no wind, no fire to tend. Just the soft breath of her children and the memory of a man who had come through snow not to save her, but to walk beside her when she decided to fight for herself. The next morning, she stepped outside and found the village stirring. Ian was there, speaking with elders. He glanced up, then back to them. Something passed between them. Approval, maybe. Trust. One of the women handed Elena a wooden cup. "Drink," she said in English. "Good for milk." Elena took it, tasted something bitter, but not unpleasant. The woman smiled and added, "Strong mother." Elena looked over her shoulder to where the twins were sleeping. She was no longer sure where the road had ended and the new one began. But for now, her children were warm. The fire was steady, and she wasn't alone. Not anymore. Elena's days settled into rhythm. The fear didn't vanish, not right away, but it shifted, no longer sharp, but dull, like a bruise learning how to heal. Mornings began with warmth instead of hunger. Willow Song, the woman who first offered her the herbal drink, returned each day with something new. Leaves, roots, bark soaked in water, steam rising from carved bowls. "Drink, for strength." "For milk," she'd say, tapping her own chest and nodding at the twins. Elena didn't question. She drank. Some were bitter, some sweet, some strange. But her body changed. The milk came easier. The exhaustion, though still present, didn't feel like drowning anymore. She asked questions when she could. Willow Song answered with few words, but always clearly, sometimes pressing Elena's hand against the herbs so she would remember the shape and scent. "You learn," she said. "Then you teach." The hot springs became part of Elena's routine. Women gathered there with their children. No one laughed at her hesitation. No one forced her to speak. They watched, let her observe, let her choose her pace. Eventually, she joined them. The warmth from the earth soaked into her bones. Her back stopped aching. Her fingers stopped trembling when she held James and Nora. When she first lowered herself into the water, she didn't cry. But when she stepped out, steam rising from her skin and her babies sleeping safe on the rocks nearby, something inside her loosened. She still slept alone. Ian had kept his word, staying with his cousin's family. But he came often. He brought food from hunts, hides to line the floor, kindling when the nights grew colder again. He never stayed long, never entered unless invited. But his eyes searched for hers, each time. Not to ask permission, just to see. She noticed. She didn't speak of it. Not yet. One evening, Willow Song entered the lodge without knocking. She sat by the fire, unwrapped a bundle, and placed it between them. Inside were 2 pairs of moccasins, no larger than Elena's hand. Soft leather, decorated with beads too fine for a child to understand, but meant for the mother to remember. "First shoes," Willow said. "Made with care." Elena touched them, and her eyes blurred. She said thank you, but it wasn't enough. She held them against her chest long after Willow left. Later that week, Chief Grey Wolf called for her. The meeting was quiet, not ceremonial. Ian stood beside him, silent. Grey Wolf didn't raise his voice. "Spring is not yet here," he said, "but you and your children will stay until it comes. You are not our blood, but you are under his word. His word is bound to yours." He looked at Ian, then back at her. "You will learn our ways. You will contribute. While you are here, you're not guest. You are part." Elena didn't nod. She didn't bow. She just said yes. "I understand." Ian didn't speak, but his eyes held something she hadn't seen before. Relief, maybe, or something older. Life didn't slow down. If anything, it pulled her in faster. She helped gather water, clean tools, sort herbs by texture and scent. Her body changed. Her thoughts did too. When she watched the women prepare meals or repair hides, she no longer saw strangers. She saw systems. Survival. Wisdom passed down not through books, but through hands. She became one of the hands. Her English wasn't needed often. Smiles worked just as well. So did rhythm. At night, the twins lay close beside her. Sometimes they stirred, sometimes cried, but they grew, and she grew with them. When Willow Song placed a woven band in her hands, marked with symbols for strength and life, Elena asked what it meant. "You wore this in the steam," she replied. "Now you wear it because you are one of us." It was an invitation. It was a fact. Ian came by more often, never unannounced, always with something useful. Meat. Arrows. A piece of bark shaped into a rattle. Once, a comb carved from antler. He didn't expect anything in return. He rarely spoke beyond the necessary. But when he looked at her, she felt steadied. She didn't flinch anymore when she saw his shadow at the door. There were moments when others whispered. Not cruelly, not with fear, but with curiosity. A few women asked gently about where she came from. Far, she'd say. I buried my husband. I had nothing left. They nodded. That was enough. Everyone here had lost something. One night, as she rocked James in her arms near the fire, Willow's song entered again. She crouched, pressed a hand to the baby's back, then looked up. You stay long after spring? She asked. Elena didn't answer. Not yet. She looked toward the entrance, where Ian stood quietly. He didn't say a word, but he didn't leave either. And she didn't want him to. Not anymore. The knock on the wooden frame of the lodge was sharp, deliberate. Not the quiet kind Ian used. Not the open rhythm of village children. Elena rose slowly, one child on her hip, the other curled in the cradle beside her. When she opened the flap, the man standing outside wasn't part of this world. Not anymore. He wore a long coat, dark with melted snow, and his eyes, though familiar, didn't carry the weight she had learned to read these past months. Mrs. Mitchell, he asked, voice stiff with concern. She nodded, tightening her hold on Nora. I'm Marshall Jensen, he said, removing his hat. I live, or lived, I suppose, on the property next to yours. I was told, well, I'd heard someone made it through the storm. His gaze flicked behind her, to the fire, to the cradle. I'd hoped it was you. They spoke outside. She didn't ask him in. He told her he'd returned weeks ago, searching cabins, hoping to find survivors. He'd known about Thomas. Rumors traveled fast, even in frozen places, and when no one answered from her homestead, he feared the worst. When she didn't respond, he continued. I've cleared out my place. It's stable. If you'd rather not stay here, he glanced toward the lodges in the distance. I can offer you a ride back to town. We can make arrangements. A real house, supplies. The children would be safer. There's a minister, a doctor, a future. Elena didn't answer. She looked past him toward the tree line, where the snow had begun to fall again. Ian wasn't there, but she felt his absence like a thread pulling across her spine. Marshall shifted awkwardly, sensing her hesitation. You don't have to decide now, he said. I'll be here a few days. Think on it. That night, the wind returned. Not as fierce as before, but steady enough to rattle the lodge walls. Elena sat near the fire, both children asleep. She held the moccasins Willow's song had given her, fingers tracing the beads. The past felt close. Too close. She remembered the pews in Pennsylvania, the frozen church steps, Thomas lifting her veil. She remembered the promises. But that world had collapsed under the weight of its own silence. No one came when she cried for help. Only Ian had come, and not to save her, just to offer warmth. The next day, Marshall returned. This time, Ian was there. They spoke briefly, cautiously. There was no hostility, but the difference between them was sharp. One belonged to maps and boundaries. The other to quiet certainty. Marshall asked Elena again. You should come back, he said. We could build something real. You and the children would have stability. A name. Elena didn't answer him. She looked at James, resting in the sling on her chest, fingers curled tight around her collar. He hadn't cried since the snow began again. He was calm, whole, and that peace hadn't come from anything she remembered from her old life. That night, the snow deepened. The wind howled louder than it had in weeks. Elena woke not from noise, but from clarity. She wrapped both children tightly, tucked them beneath her coat, and stepped out into the storm. She didn't look back. She crossed the camp without hesitation, feet finding the path even under drifts. When she reached Ian's lodge, she didn't knock. She opened the flap and stepped inside. He looked up, surprised, but didn't speak. She knelt, laying the babies down by the fire. Then she looked at him. I'm not going back, she said. Whatever was behind me, it stayed there. Ian nodded, not in triumph, but in understanding. He didn't move toward her. She moved toward him, and when he reached out to steady one of the sleeping children, his hand paused, not on the blanket, but on hers. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. But inside, the storm had passed. The news came before sunrise, carried on the breath of a messenger whose horse still steamed with frost. Soldiers had been seen beyond the northern ridge. 5 riders, slow-moving, scanning the terrain. They weren't hunting. They were scouting. Word spread through the village fast. Not panic, not yet, but something close. Grey Wolf called a council. Ian was summoned first. Elena stood just outside the gathering, close enough to hear fragments. They say we must move. Government wants the land cleared. Spring hasn't come. How will the old survive? By midday, the shape of it was clear. A military detachment had issued an order: relocate the tribe by the next thaw. Make way for settlers. They called it safety. Progress. Elena recognized the tone. It was the same tone she heard in courtrooms back east, when they discussed land and contracts and public good. Ian didn't shout. He didn't posture. He listened, then asked for time. Let me speak with them, he said. Let me try. Elena volunteered before she could second-guess herself. I'll go with you. The room quieted. A few eyes turned toward her, not unfriendly, but cautious. She stood straight. If I speak, they might listen differently. I can't promise anything. But if they see us together, man of this land, woman of theirs, they'll think longer before they give orders. Grey Wolf didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once. She's family now. Let them see what they threatened to break. The next morning, they rode out before dawn. Ian led, Elena beside him, the children safe with Willow song. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. She wore her old boots, patched but still serviceable. Her coat was a mix of materials now. Fur and cloth, village and settler. A braid hung behind her shoulder. It wasn't symbolic. It was who she'd become. The outpost was cold, stiff with lines and hierarchy. 2 officers waited outside the wooden building. They didn't reach for weapons, but they didn't smile either. We receive your request, the taller one said. You've got 5 minutes. Inside, the room smelled of paper and smoke. Maps on the wall, a table between them. Elena sat down beside Ian. Across from them, 3 men in uniform. A civilian sat at the end, pale, watchful, pen in hand. You're not part of the official tribal delegation, one of the officers said to her. Who are you? She answered simply, I'm a mother. I'm raising 2 children in that village. They eat from its fire. They're carried on its backs. I speak because they live there. He raised an eyebrow. White woman, native village. That's unusual. She didn't blink. So, is losing a husband in a snowstorm and surviving it with nothing but a stranger's kindness? But it happened. Ian spoke then, calm and deliberate. We don't seek conflict. We ask only time. Let the snow melt. Let the season pass. Forcing movement now would kill many. You know this. One of the officers leaned back. We have orders. Elena leaned forward. And you have eyes. You can choose how to read those orders. These people, my people, are not resisting. They're surviving. She paused. I'm not here to ask for mercy. I'm asking for sense. The room went quiet. The civilian spoke at last. And after the thaw, Ian answered. Then we speak again. As neighbors. Not fugitives. The officer sighed. We'll grant delay. But it goes on record. No promises for permanent status. Ian stood. Elena followed. At the door, she turned. Let your record show we came in peace. That's all history ever remembers in the end. As they stepped outside, Ian extended a hand to the lead officer. After a moment's pause, the man took it. A quiet handshake, but one that meant everything. When they returned to the village, children ran to greet them. Willow Song waited at the edge of the path. Elena took the twins in her arms, held them tight. The tribe would stay, at least for now. Not because of permission, but because someone stood up and said they belonged. Not as white, not as native, just as people. That night, no songs were sung, no speeches made, but the fire burned brighter than usual. And Ian, for the first time, didn't sit beside her. He sat with her. They didn't announce the wedding so much as allow it to unfold. No invitations, no printed words, just a circle formed at dusk, with both communities standing side by side. Ian wore his father's beads and his mother's feathers. Elena stood barefoot, the hem of her dress stitched with thread from 2 worlds. The elder spoke first, in the native tongue, words thick with time. Then the settler woman, Martha Wilson, stepped forward to read a brief blessing, hand resting lightly on Elena's shoulder. When Ian took her hands, he didn't say a vow. He said a promise, to walk beside, through whatever comes. And she answered with the same. No ring was exchanged. Instead, Willow Song stepped forward and tied a thin cord of woven reed around both their wrists, nodding at once, firmly. The fire crackled louder, as if it agreed. The children, still too young to understand, watched from Willow's arms. They would remember none of it, but feel all of it. Weeks later, they returned to Elena's old cabin. It had survived more than any building had a right to. Ian cleared the chimney first, then replaced the roof in sections. Elena washed every surface. The cradle went by the window. Herbs hung from the ceiling again, this time not out of desperation, but habit. They painted the door red. When the work was done, she carved a name above the frame, Reynolds Ian. It was hers and his, past and future. One name, Willow Song, chose to return to her village. She said it plainly. Young families need space. Grandmothers need silence. But before she left, she pulled Elena close. You visit. Every season. You bring children, or I come take them. They laughed, but both knew it wasn't a joke. They hugged without words. Ian lifted her bundles onto the horse himself. Willow didn't look back. As spring settled into summer, more families came. Some were Comanche, some not. Some were women like Elena, with stories behind their eyes and babies on their hips. She didn't seek them out, but they found her. They asked about the teas, the roots, the bruises that wouldn't heal. She taught them what Willow had taught her. Boil this. Don't eat that. And if it smells like ash, throw it away. The women listened. The children followed her. They started calling her Snow Mother. She didn't correct them. By autumn, the fire circle grew larger. They danced in the evenings, slow steps around the flames. One night, Elena noticed someone had placed 2 tiny moccasins on the high branch of a pine tree above the gathering. She didn't ask who. She just looked up and smiled. This wasn't the life she imagined, but it was the life she chose. And maybe that was better. She hadn't been saved by a hero or rescued by luck. She had survived, rebuilt, learned, taught. She had stayed. And now, every time the fire lit, she kept it going, not just for her family, but for anyone still trying to find warmth in a broken world. If this story moved you, even just a little, let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts, share your strength. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about quiet courage, unexpected connection, and the kind of love that builds slowly, make sure to subscribe. Your next favorite story might be waiting right here.